Some folks say the loneliest people learn to listen the hardest. This is a story about a man who forgot how to be still, and a woman the world refused to hear, out in the canyon country of the Old West. They found something neither expected, not love at first, but something rarer. Respect, and from respect, like a seed planted in good soil. Everything else grew quiet and true. If you have ever felt invisible, or lost, or unsure of your place in this world, this story is for you. Pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee. Let me tell you how it happened. Some stories stay with you long after the telling is done. This one has stayed with me for more years than I care to count. It is a tale of two wounded souls who found each other in the harsh and beautiful land of the American West. A man who had forgotten how to live, and a woman who learned to see the world in ways most folks never could. She was deaf from birth, yet she heard things the rest of us missed. He was a soldier who came home from the war to find that home had vanished while he was gone. I wrote this story for those of you who understand that life's greatest battles are not fought with guns or fists, but within our own hearts, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply decide to stay. May it bring you comfort, as the writing of it brought me peace. 3 days. That whiskey had been sitting there for 3 days. Silas Drifter watched the amber liquid catch the lamplight, turning it into something almost pretty. He did not drink it, did not push it away. The glass just sat there in front of him, same as he sat in this chair, in this corner, in this town, whose name he had already let slip from his memory. The Red Stallion Saloon smelled the way all such places smelled: stale beer soaked into the floorboards, cheap tobacco smoke hanging in the air like fog. And underneath it all, the sharp bite of whiskey and the sour tang of men who had been too long on the trail. The coal oil lamps along the walls gave off a yellowish glow and a faint smell of kerosene. Somewhere in the kitchen, bacon grease popped and sizzled. Laughter erupted from a card table near the window. A piano player with more enthusiasm than skill banged out something that might have been a waltz, missing every third note. The bartender, a thick-armed fellow with a gray mustache that covered half his face, wiped the same spot on the counter over and over, stealing glances at the stranger in the corner who neither drank nor spoke nor left. Silas counted the cracks in the wooden table. 17. He had counted them yesterday, too, and the day before that. The door swung open, letting in a gust of evening air that smelled of dust and sage. He did not look up. Footsteps crossed the floor, heavy, uneven, the gait of a man carrying more weight than what sat on his shoulders. They stopped at the bar. "I need someone who can track." The voice was raw, scraped thin by something Silas recognized right away: desperation. It had a particular sound to it, like rope pulled too tight and fixing to snap. "Someone who knows the land east of here, Red Canyon and beyond." The bartender's rag paused mid-circle. "Tracking what?" "My daughter." Silas's finger stopped on crack number 11. "She is 8 years old. Been missing 2 days now." The man's voice cracked on the number, as if saying it aloud made it more real than he could bear. "I have had 3 men go out looking. They came back with nothing. Said the trail went cold past Miller's Creek." The bartender shook his head slowly, the way folks do when they have bad news and no way to soften it. "Sorry to hear that, mister. Mighty sorry. But most men who know that territory are either dead or moved on. That is rough country out there. Canyons twist back on themselves something fierce. A man could wander for weeks and never find his way. I will pay. Whatever it takes, I will pay. It is not about money, friend. It is about finding someone fool enough to— I heard there is a tracker, lives out past the old Dawson claim, someone who can find anything." The bartender's expression changed. Something flickered across his weathered face, not quite fear, not quite pity. Something caught between the two. "You do not want that one." "Why not?" A pause settled over them, The piano player hit a wrong note and kept right on going. She is different. Different how? Just different. Most folks around here do not deal with her. She keeps to herself out there, living alone with her herbs and her ways. Some say she is touched. Others say worse things I will not repeat. The stranger leaned closer. Can she track? Another pause. Longer this time. The bartender glanced toward Silas's corner, then back again. They say she tracked a wounded elk through a thunderstorm once. Found it 12 miles out, in a canyon nobody even knew was there. They say she reads the ground the way a preacher reads scripture. He dropped his voice low. They also say she cannot hear a single word you speak to her. Deaf since the day she was born. You would have to write everything down. And even then, she might not help you. She does not trust people. Got her reasons, I reckon. Silas raised his head. The man at the bar was perhaps 50. Though grief had carved extra years into his face and left them there to stay. His vest was coated in trail dust, 2 days' worth. Maybe more. He had not slept. That much was plain from the hollows beneath his eyes, from the slight tremor in his hands as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a pocket watch, gold-plated, catching the lamplight. He opened it with a soft click. Inside, where a watch face ought to be, there was a photograph, a young girl with braided hair and a gap-toothed smile, wearing what looked like her Sunday dress. Her name is Ruth. The man's thumb brushed across the edge of the photograph, gentle as a prayer. She went out to pick wild berries near the canyon rim. Her mother. He stopped, swallowed hard. Her mother passed 3 winters ago. Ruth is all I have left in this world. The bartender said nothing. There was nothing to say. The piano player finished his song. In the sudden quiet, Silas heard the creak of his own chair as he pushed himself to his feet. Both men turned to look at him. Silas crossed the room slowly. His boots were worn at the heels from too many miles. His coat hung loose on a frame that had once been broader. Back when he had reasons to eat regular meals. He stopped beside the stranger and looked at the photograph, not at the girl's face, but at the man's hand. At the way his fingers curled around the watch's edge. At the whiteness of his knuckles. Where exactly did she go missing? The man's eyes went wide with something that looked mighty close to hope. North ridge of Red Canyon, near the old berry thickets where the wild blackberries grow. You know the area. I know it. You will help me. Silas did not answer right away. He looked at the photograph once more, then at the man's face, at the red-rimmed eyes, the unshaven jaw, the desperate need written plain as day. What is your name? Webb. Harlan Webb. I own the ranch south of town. Or what is left of it. Anyhow. The tracker the bartender mentioned. The woman who lives alone. Where would I find her? Webb blinked, confusion clouding his features. You will not go yourself. I am not the one you need, Mr. Webb. Silas turned toward the door. But I reckon I know someone who might be. He was halfway across the room when Webb called after him. Wait, what is your name? How do I find you? Silas paused with his hand resting on the door frame. The evening air drifted in through the gap, carrying the smell of dust and sage and something else, rain coming. Maybe. Still a few hours off. Silas Drifter, he said without turning around. And you do not find me, I find you. The door swung shut behind him. Outside, the sky was bleeding into shades of copper and ash, the way it does when the day is letting go and the night is reaching up to take hold. Silas stood on the wooden sidewalk and breathed in the cooling air. His hands were steady enough. His pulse was not. For 3 years, he had drifted from town to town, looking for something he could not put a name to, a reason to stay put, a reason to give a care about anything at all. He had found neither. But that photograph, the gap-toothed smile, the Sunday braids, the way Webb's hand had trembled holding it. He thought of another face, a boy's face, 19 years old, pale as river stone, lips forming a single word as the light faded from his eyes. Mama. Silas pulled his coat tighter against the evening chill and stepped off the sidewalk into the fading light. He had not been able to help that boy, had not been able to do a blessed thing. But maybe, just maybe, he could help this one. The question that kept turning in his mind, the one he could not shake loose, was whether the deaf woman living out on the edge of nowhere would let him try. Before we continue, I'd love to know which city you're watching from. Let's get back to the story. The cottage sat crooked against the hillside, looking like the land itself had tried to shrug it off and given up halfway. Silas tied his horse to a leaning fence post and walked the rest of the way on foot. Smoke curled from a gap in the roof where shingles had rotted clean through. The air smelled of mint and sage and something sharper chamomile, maybe, drying in bundles that hung from a rope strung between two posts. A woman stood near a chopping block with her back to him. She raised an axe high and brought it down. The wood split with a clean crack. "Ma'am." She reached for another log. "Ma'am, I need a word with you." The axe swung again. Crack. 2 pieces tumbled off either side of the block. Silas stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dry grass. "I said, she cannot hear you, mister." He turned. An old woman had come around the corner of the cottage, a basket of brown eggs balanced against her hip. She was small and weathered, her face creased like old leather left too long in the sun. "Mercy has been deaf since the day she was born," the old woman said. "Hollering at her will not do you a lick of good." Silas looked back at the woman with the axe. She had not turned, had not so much as flinched. Her shoulders moved with the steady rhythm of honest work, each swing landing true and clean. "Then how do I—" "She has got a slate." The old woman nodded toward the chopping block. "Wears it around her neck on a cord. You write down what you need to say." Silas stood there with his hands loose at his sides. He had commanded men through cannon fire and cavalry charges. He had given orders that sent boys younger than himself into smoke and death. Now he could not find words for a woman who would never hear them anyway. The axe stopped mid-swing. Mercy Hollow turned around. She was younger than he had reckoned, late 20s. Maybe. Her hair was the color of wet earth, pulled back in a single braid that hung over one shoulder. Her dress was faded calico, blue gone to gray from too many washings and too much sun. But her eyes gray, pale gray, like creek stones under shallow water. They moved over him slowly, taking his measure from his worn-out boots to his belt to his face. She crossed the yard and stopped in front of him. Then she reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. Silas felt her calluses through the thin cotton of his shirt. Her eyes narrowed. She held there for 3 heartbeats. 4. Then she stepped back, lifted the slate from around her neck, and scratched 3 words in chalk. She held it up where he could read it. "Why are you afraid?" Silas took the slate from her hands. The chalk was worn down to a nub, barely enough to grip between his fingers. He wrote slowly, pressing harder than necessary to make the letters show. "A child is missing. 8 years old. 2 days gone." Mercy read the words. Her face did not change, not a flicker, not a twitch. She wiped the slate clean with her sleeve and wrote back in quick. "Sure strokes. I know. The Webb girl. Word travels." He had not expected that. News moved fast in small places. He reckoned even to women who lived alone on the edge of nowhere. He took the slate again. "Will you help find her?" She did not answer right away. Her gray eyes moved past him, toward the creek, toward the hills that rose purple and gold in the evening light. The old woman, Martha, she had called herself, had disappeared back into her own cottage down the hill, leaving them alone in the cooling air. Mercy reached for the slate, her chalk scratched against the dark surface. "Last time I helped, they blamed me when the search came up empty. Said I led them wrong on purpose. Said I was cursed. Silas read the words twice. His thumb smeared the chalk dust at the edge. He wrote back, "I will not blame you." She looked at what he had written. A sound came from her throat, not quite a laugh, not quite something else. The kind of sound a body makes when they have heard a promise too many times to believe it anymore. She wrote, "Everybody says that. I am not everybody." Her eyes lifted to his face. Gray meeting gray, like storm clouds fixing to collide. She studied him the way she had before reading something in the set of his jaw, the slump of his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man carrying more weight than what showed. "Why do you care about this girl?" The question sat on the slate like a stone dropped in still water. Silas stared at the words. His jaw tightened. He could feel the muscle jumping beneath his skin, the way it always did when someone got too close to something he did not want to examine. He did not know how to answer, did not know if he could. He wrote, "I do not know yet." Mercy tilted her head to one side. For a long spell. She simply looked at him, looked through him. More like the way some folks can see past what a man shows the world and straight into what he is hiding from himself. Then she wiped the slate clean, turned on her heel, and walked back toward her cottage without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. Silas stood in the yard, the empty slate hanging from its cord in his hand. The sun had started its slow slide toward the ridge, painting the hills in shades of rust and honey. A crow called out from somewhere in the pines. His horse shifted at the fence post, nickering soft and low. He did not leave. Instead, he walked to the porch, 3 wooden steps. The middle one cracked near through and sat himself down. He set the slate on the boards beside him. He folded his hands over his knees and watched the light change. The shadows grew long across the dirt yard. The bundles of herbs swayed in a breeze that smelled of coming rain and wild sage. From inside the cottage came the sounds of living footsteps on a wood floor, the scrape of something heavy being moved, the clatter of pots and iron skillets. He did not knock, did not call out. He simply sat. The stars came out one by one, pricking little holes in the darkening sky. His stomach growled something fierce, but he paid it no mind. His back ached from the hard wood of the step. He shifted but did not rise. At some point he could not say when the door creaked open. A hand appeared in the gap, setting down a tin cup of water and a heel of bread wrapped in a scrap of cloth. The door closed again before he could so much as nod his thanks. Silas ate the bread slowly, chewing each bite until it was soft enough to swallow easy. The water tasted of the creek clean and cold and faintly sweet. When he finished, he set the cup beside the door where she would find it come morning. Then he pulled his coat tight around his shoulders and settled back against the porch post. He slept sitting up, the way he had learned during the war. Dreams came and went, broken pieces of sound and smoke. Faces he tried to hold on to but could not. He woke once to the low hoot of an owl in the pines, twice to something rustling through the brush nearby. Each time, he let his eyes fall closed again and waited for whatever morning would bring. Dawn arrived soft and pale, the sky turning from black to gray to the faintest pink along the eastern ridge. Silas opened his eyes to find Mercy Hollow standing 3 feet in front of him. She wore the same faded calico dress, but a leather satchel hung from her shoulder now. A coil of rope crossed her chest. Her hair was braided tight against her head, and a small knife in a worn sheath hung from her belt. At her feet sat a canvas pack, bulging with supplies. She looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded, once, sharp and sure. That was all the answer he needed. Silas pushed himself up, his joints stiff and protesting from a night on hard boards. He did not speak, there was no point in it. He simply followed as she walked past him, around the side of the cottage, toward a small rise he had not noticed the evening before. The grave was marked with a wooden cross made from 2 pieces of pine lashed together with rawhide. The name carved into the crosspiece was simple: Ada Hollow. Beloved Mother, 1821 to 1879. Mercy knelt in the dirt beside the grave. She bowed her head, and her lips moved, not speaking aloud, but praying in the silence that was her world. Her hand reached into the pocket of her dress and came out holding a single wildflower, purple and small, its petals already starting to wilt. She laid it at the base of the cross. Her fingers rested on the weathered wood for the space of one breath. 2, 3. Then she rose, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked past Silas without meeting his eyes. He understood. She was not saying goodbye to him. She was saying goodbye to the only person who had ever believed she was worth something. They walked back to the front of the cottage in silence. 2 horses stood waiting by the fence now his own, and a dappled gray mare with kind eyes that must have belonged to her. Webb's doing. Silas reckoned. The rancher had sent the second horse sometime during the night, along with a leather envelope tied to Silas's saddle. He opened it. Money, more than he had expected, crisp bills and a handful of gold coins. A note in shaky handwriting was tucked inside. Please, bring her home. H. Webb. Silas looked at Mercy. She was checking the straps on her mare, adjusting the satchel across her shoulder, her movements quick and practiced. He crossed to her horse and tucked the envelope into her saddlebag. She turned, saw what he had done. Her brow furrowed, and she reached into the bag, pulled out the envelope, and pushed it firm against his chest. He pushed it back. For a moment they stood there, the envelope pressed between them, neither one willing to take it. Then Mercy made that sound again, the one that was almost a laugh, but not quite, and let the envelope drop onto her saddle. She swung up onto the mare in one smooth motion, easy as breathing. Silas climbed onto his own horse. The worn leather creaked beneath him, familiar and strange at the same time. He could not remember the last time he had ridden toward something instead of away from it. Mercy turned her horse toward the east, toward the rising sun and the red rocks waiting beyond the hills. She did not look back to see if he would follow. He followed anyway. They rode for the better part of an hour before she raised her hand and brought them to a stop at a fork in the trail. 2 paths led into the canyon lands, one wide and well-worn from years of use, the other barely visible beneath scrub brush and loose stone. Mercy dismounted. She handed her reins to Silas and walked to the edge of the lesser path, where she knelt and pressed her palm flat against the earth. She stayed that way for a long while, still as stone. Her fingers spread across the dirt like she was listening to something only she could hear. When she rose, her face had changed. The careful blankness was gone. In its place was something sharper, something focused, the look of a hound that has caught a scent. She pulled out the slate and wrote in quick strokes. The other trackers went left. The main trail. Silas took the slate, and they were wrong. She pointed toward the faint path on the right, the one that disappeared into shadow and tangled brush. She went this way, but not alone. Silas felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. What do you mean? Mercy wiped the slate clean and wrote again, her chalk pressing hard enough to leave grooves in the dark surface. Someone was with her, a grown woman. Their footprints walked side by side, not chasing, not running, walking together. She looked up at him, and in those pale gray eyes he saw something he had not expected to find there. Uncertainty. Ruth was not running from something. Mr. Drifter. She was running to someone. The trail vanished within the first mile. Silas reined his horse to a stop and scanned the ground ahead. Rock and scrub stretched out in every direction, the terrain broken up by shallow gullies and clusters of juniper that all looked the same. No path, no hoof prints, nothing that resembled a direction at all. Mercy did not stop. She guided her mare off to the left, toward a patch of ground that appeared no different from any other patch of ground Silas could see. She dismounted, handed her reins to him without so much as a glance, and knelt in the dirt. Her fingers spread wide across the earth. She leaned in close, her nose nearly touching the soil, and breathed deep. She stayed that way for a long moment, perfectly still, then shifted 3 feet to the right and did the whole thing over again. Silas watched from the saddle. His horse stamped and tossed its head, impatient with standing. He felt the same impatience rising in his own chest, the old soldier's urge to move, to push forward, to do something useful. 3 years of aimless wandering had not cured him of that particular itch. Sitting still felt like giving up. Moving felt like progress, even when it led nowhere. But Mercy was not sitting still. She was reading. She rose and walked another 10 feet. This time toward a cluster of foxtail grass growing at the base of a red-brown boulder. She crouched low, parted the dry stalks with her fingers, and plucked something from among them. A single blade of grass, broken near the middle. She held it up, turning it slow in the morning light. Silas swung down from his horse and crossed to where she knelt. He squinted at the grass in her hand. It looked like any other blade, brown and brittle, bent at an angle. He had walked past 1,000 such things without giving them a second thought. Mercy pulled out her slate. Look at the break. He looked. The grass was snapped near the center, the broken end hanging by a thread of fiber. I see it is broken. She shook her head, wiped the slate, wrote again. Not stepped on. Pulled. Bent sideways first, then snapped. Someone crawled through here on hands and knees. Silas stared at the blade of grass. Such a small thing. Such an ordinary, everyday thing. How do you know that? When a foot steps on grass, it breaks straight down from the weight. When something drags across it a body, a leg, an arm, the stalk bends to the side before it snaps. The angle tells the story. She pointed to the surrounding stalks. Now that she had shown him what to look for, he could see it a faint pattern in the grass, a subtle parting where something had pushed through low to the ground. Ruth was crawling here, trying to hide her trail. Silas felt something shift in his chest. An 8-year-old girl, out here alone in wild country, crawling through the brush like a hunted animal. The picture of it settled behind his ribs and stayed there, heavy as a stone. Who taught her to do that? Mercy shrugged. She did not know, did not need to know. She followed what the earth told her, and that was enough. They moved on. The morning stretched into afternoon, the sun climbing high and hot overhead. Mercy stopped a dozen times or more at a scuff mark on stone that Silas could barely see, at a place where the lichen on a rock had been scraped away, at a spot where the dust looked different somehow, though he could not have said why. Each time she knelt, studied, and rose with more certainty in her step than before. Silas learned to watch her instead of watching the ground. When her shoulders went tight, she had found something worth finding. When her head tilted to the left, she was puzzling through a question. When she reached up and touched her braid, a quick, unconscious little gesture, she was turning something over in her mind. He began to see her the way she saw the earth, as something to be read, near midday, with the sun beating down fierce enough to make the air shimmer. She stopped beside a thicket of wild roses gone to bramble. Thorns curved in every direction, sharp and brown and mean-looking. Without hesitation, she reached into the tangle, her sleeve catching on the barbs, and pulled out something small, a ribbon, pale blue silk, frayed at one end. Mercy held it to her nose and drew in a long breath. Then she handed it to Silas. He lifted it to his own face. The ribbon smelled of dust and dried sweat, and something faintly sweet underneath lye soap. Maybe, or the ghost of it, a little girl's ribbon, torn from her hair as she pushed through the thorns. How old is this? Mercy took the ribbon back and examined the frayed edge, rubbing the silk between her fingers to test the stiffness. 1 day, perhaps less. The fabric has not weathered yet. One day. Ruth had passed through here just one day ago. Alive. Still moving. Silas tucked the ribbon into his shirt pocket, pressing it flat against his chest next to his heart. They made camp as the sun dropped toward the ridgeline, settling into a hollow between two boulders that cut the evening wind. Silas gathered dead juniper branches while Mercy scraped out a pit for the fire. The wood was dry enough to catch quick, and soon flames crackled against the gathering dark, sending sparks spiraling up toward the first stars. He filled the old tin coffee pot from his canteen and set it on a flat stone close to the coals. The water hissed and began to steam. He added a handful of Arbuckle's grounds, the good stuff, dark and strong, and let the pot come to a boil while the smell of fresh coffee rose up to mix with the wood smoke. Mercy sat cross-legged on the far side of the fire, the slate resting on her knee. The firelight played across her face, catching the hollows of her cheeks and the steady gray of her eyes. She had not written a word all day, had not needed to. Her hands and her feet and her way of reading the land had said everything that needed saying. Silas poured the coffee into 2 tin cups, thick with grounds that swirled and sank to the bottom. He handed one across the flames to her. She wrapped her fingers around the warm metal and held it close to her face, breathing in the steam the way a body breathes in a blessing. He pulled out his own slate, Martha's old one, borrowed and likely never to be returned, and scratched out a question. "How did you learn to track like that?" Mercy read the words. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. There and gone, quick as a heartbeat. She wrote back, "My mother taught me. She always said when you lose one sense, the 4 that remain grow stronger to make up for it. I lost my hearing, so I learned to see. See what everything, the ground remembers every foot that touches it, every animal, every person. The stories are all there, written in dust and stone and grass. You just have to know how to read them." Silas turned the slate over in his hands. The chalk was wearing thin. He would need more before long. "What do you see when you look at me?" Mercy studied him across the fire. The flames popped and crackled, throwing sparks. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote yipped and went quiet again. She wrote slowly this time. Each letter set down with care. A man who came back from somewhere terrible. A man who does not understand why he lived when so many others did not. The words hit him square in the chest. He stared at them, unable to look away. "How you walk like you are still carrying a rifle. You sleep with your boots on and your back to a wall. And your eyes." She paused, the chalk hovering over the slate. "Your eyes look at everything like it might turn dangerous without warning." Silas set down the slate. His hands had started to tremble, and he pressed them flat against his thighs to make them stop. The fire burned low between them. The coffee grew cold in his cup. At last he picked up the chalk again. "I went home after the war ended, but home was not there anymore. My wife had passed from the fever while I was gone. The house stood empty, so I left. Been leaving ever since." Mercy read what he had written. She did not offer words of comfort, did not reach across the fire or scratch out some kindness on her slate. She simply read, wiped the surface clean, and set it aside. They sat together in the quiet as the fire died to embers and the stars wheeled slow overhead. After a time, Mercy picked up her slate once more. "Tomorrow we reach the place where she stopped to rest, an old cabin, abandoned, maybe 3 miles on. That is where the tracks lead." Silas nodded, then a thought came to him. "You said she was traveling with someone. A grown woman." "Yes." "Do you know who?" Mercy hesitated. The chalk hovered above the slate, and in the fading firelight he saw something flicker across her face. A woman who has walked this path many times before. Her footprints are deep in the earth, old tracks beneath new ones. She knew this route. She had been waiting. The coyotes called again, closer now, their voices rising and falling in the darkness. Someone had been waiting for Ruth Webb. Someone had planned all of this. The canyon walls rose up on either side, like the ribs of some great beast that had laid down to die and never gotten back up. Silas tilted his head and felt the muscles in his neck pull tight. The rim was 200 feet above them, maybe more. The strip of sky caught between the red stone walls looked thin as a ribbon, bright and impossibly far away. Mercy walked ahead, leading her mare by the reins. The path, if a body could rightly call it a path, was barely wide enough for one horse. Loose stones shifted beneath their hooves, clattering down into the shadows below and taking a long time to stop making noise. Silas kept his eyes fixed on Mercy's back. She moved through this rough country the way water moves through rock, finding the gaps, the holds, the places where the stone would take her weight. Her feet landed sure and true. Her body swayed easy with the uneven ground. She did not pause to think about where to step next. She simply knew. He did not know. His boots scraped and slid against the sandstone. His right knee, the one that had never healed proper after Shiloh, throbbed with each step, sending little jolts of pain up through his hip. The heat pressed down from above, trapped between these canyon walls like it had nowhere else to go. Thick and still and hard to breathe. Sweat soaked clean through his shirt and dried in white salt lines across his shoulders. The path grew narrower still. Mercy stopped her mare and turned, making a motion with her hand for Silas to climb down. He did, his legs unsteady as they found the solid ground. The ledge up ahead was no wider than a man's shoulders. Below it, the canyon dropped away into shadow so deep it looked like it went all the way to perdition. She tied her mare to a scrub oak that somehow clung to life on the cliff face and started across the ledge on foot. Her steps were measured, careful, each one placed with the kind of thought most folks give to signing their name on an important paper. She kept one hand pressed flat against the rock wall, her fingers trailing across the rough surface. Silas followed. The stone was warm under his palm, heated by long hours of sun. He pressed his shoulder against the wall and shuffled forward, his boots hunting for solid ground on that narrow strip of rock. Below, the darkness yawned. He made himself not look down. Halfway across, his right foot came down on a loose stone. The rock shifted, slid. His weight went with it. For one terrible heartbeat, there was nothing beneath him. Just air, just the pull of the earth wanting to take him, just the certainty of falling. His hand clawed at the wall, fingernails scraping stone. His other arm swung wild, grabbing for something, anything. A grip closed around his wrist, hard, sure, strong as braided rope. Mercy. She had his arm, her fingers digging into the flesh above his pulse. Her other hand was braced flat against the cliff, her body angled to counterbalance his weight. Her face showed no strain, though she was holding a man near twice her size from tumbling into the dark. She pulled. Silas scrambled, his boots scraping and sliding until they found the ledge again. His free hand slapped flat against the rock wall. He pressed himself against the stone, chest heaving, heart slamming hard enough he could feel it in his throat. Mercy let go of his wrist. She stepped back, giving him room to collect himself. He stared at her. His mouth had gone dry as dust. The words he wanted to say thank you. How in creation did you know? I very nearly died all tangled up somewhere between his chest and his tongue. She reached for her slate. You shifted your weight too far to the right. I saw your shoulder drop before your foot moved. He read the words twice. Saw. She had seen him start to fall before he even knew he was falling. How? She wiped the slate clean and wrote again. When a body's center moves past their base, they fall. Simple as that. Watch the body, not the feet. Simple. She called it simple. Silas looked down at his wrist, where her fingers had left red marks pressed into his skin. That grip had been fierce, far stronger than he would have guessed from looking at her. The marks would likely bruise by morning. He found he did not mind. They finished crossing the ledge without further trouble. On the far side, the canyon opened up into a small bowl of land, sheltered from the wind. A trickle of water seeped from a crack in the rock, pooling in a shallow basin before disappearing down into the sand. Clumps of prickly pear cactus dotted the walls, their yellow flowers bright as butter against the red stone. Mercy knelt beside the water and filled her canteen. Silas did the same, cupping the cold liquid in his palms and drinking deep. It tasted of minerals and earth, clean and sharp and good. They made camp in that sheltered bowl as the sun slid behind the canyon rim. The shadows came on quick in a place like this, pooling in the low spots, turning the red rock to rust and then to black. Silas built a fire from dead juniper, not much of one. Too small for real warmth, just enough for light and to keep the night creatures at a respectful distance. They ate what they had, strips of dried beef tough as saddle leather, biscuits hard enough to crack a tooth if a man was not careful, a handful of raisins gone sticky from the heat. Not much of a supper, but it would keep body and soul together until morning. The stars came out thick and bright overhead. In this narrow slot of sky, they seemed crowded together, like folks pressing close to get a look at something important. Silas lay on his back with his saddle for a pillow and his coat spread over his chest. The fire had burned down to orange coals. Mercy was a dark shape on the far side of the pit, her breathing slow and even. He closed his eyes. The dream came the way it always came, sudden and complete, pulling him down like a hand reaching up from deep water. He was in the field hospital again. The tent walls were stained with things he did not want to name. The air was thick with the smell of copper and rot, and the sharp bite of carbolic acid. Men lay on canvas cots in rows that seemed to go on forever. Some of them crying out. Some of them quiet. Some of them already gone to whatever waited on the other side. There was a boy on the cot next to his. 19 years old. Maybe younger. Hard to tell with all the blood. A hole in his belly the surgeons had tried to close but could not. His face was the color of tallow candles. The boy's hand found Silas's in the dark. "Please," he whispered. His voice was thin as paper. "Please do not let me die alone." Silas held on. Held on while the boy's grip weakened. Held on while the breathing turned to rattles. Held on while the hand in his went cold and slack. The boy's lips moved one final time. "Mama." Silas woke with a gasp tearing out of his throat. His shirt was soaked through with sweat gone cold. His hands shook like leaves in a hard wind. He could still feel the weight of that dead hand in his, could still hear the wet rasp of failing lungs. The fire was nothing but ash now. The canyon was silent and dark. He was alone with the memory of a boy whose name he had never thought to ask. He pushed himself up and pressed his palms hard against his eyes. His chest heaved. His throat had closed up tight. The pressure built behind his ribs, demanding some kind of release that would not come. A warmth settled beside him. He had not heard her move. One moment he was alone. The next, Mercy was there, sitting close enough that her shoulder touched his. She did not look at him, did not reach for her slate, did not try to ask what was wrong or offer words meant to comfort. She simply sat. Her warmth seeped through the thin cotton of his sleeve. Her breathing was slow and steady, the rhythm of a body fully present, fully calm. She smelled of wood smoke and sage and something clean underneath, like creek water. Silas's hands stopped their shaking. He did not know how long they stayed that way. Minutes, maybe an hour. The stars wheeled slow overhead. A shooting star traced a bright line across the darkness, there and gone in the space of a breath. The tightness in his chest began to ease. When his breathing had steadied out, Mercy rose without a word. She crossed to her bedroll, lay down, and closed her eyes. She had not asked what haunted his dreams, had not pushed for explanations or offered hollow words of comfort. She had simply been there. And somehow, that was enough. Silas eased himself back down and stared up at the narrow strip of stars. His heart still beat too fast, but the panic had drawn back like a tide going out, leaving something behind that felt almost like peace. He turned his head and looked at the dark shape across the dead fire. For 3 years, he had kept everyone at arm's length, had not let a single soul close enough to see the cracks running through him, had built walls out of silence and empty roads and the weight of miles behind him. She had walked right through those walls like they were made of morning mist. And the strangest part, the part that kept him awake long after his body had stopped trembling, was that he did not mind one bit. He drifted in and out of an uneasy sleep as the night wore on. When the first pale light of dawn began to show, gray and soft along the canyon rim, he opened his eyes to find Mercy already awake. She was crouched at the edge of the water basin, her body gone rigid as fence wire. Silas pushed himself up on one elbow. "What is it?" She did not turn, of course she did not. She could not hear him. He crossed the camp and looked down at what had caught her attention. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. 2 horses, pressed deep into the damp sand beside the water. The prints overlapped the older tracks they had been following, but these were new, made within the last few hours. While they slept, Mercy pulled out her slate. Her hand was steady, but her jaw had gone tight. Someone else is following Ruth. Silas felt the hair stand up on the back of his neck. Who? Mercy's chalk hovered above the dark surface. She looked up and met his eyes. And in that pale gray gaze, he saw something that turned his blood cold. "I do not know, but they passed right by us in the dark, and they are moving fast." They rode hard through the morning. The fresh tracks, 2 horses. Heavy riders cut clean across Ruth's trail and kept going, heading deeper into the canyonlands. Whoever these folks were, they knew where they were headed. The prince did not wander or double back. They moved in a straight line towards something out there in the wild country. Silas pushed his horse until the animal's flanks turned dark with sweat and foam flecked its mouth. Mercy matched his pace stride for stride, her mare's hooves striking the packed earth in steady rhythm. The sun climbed higher and hotter, burning away what little coolness the morning had offered, and turning the air thick and dry as old cotton. Near midday, they came to a fork in the canyon. One path dropped down into shadow. The other climbed toward a ridge bristling with scrub pine and juniper. Mercy dismounted and knelt at the place where the trails divided, her fingers tracing through the confusion of prints pressed into the dust. Silas waited in the saddle, gripping the reins, watching the way her shoulders drew together. She rose and pointed toward the path that climbed upward. Ruth went up, the others went down. He read the words on her slate and felt something ease loose in his chest. The riders had not caught her yet. Whoever was following the girl, they had taken the wrong fork. They climbed. The path grew steeper with every switchback, winding up toward the ridge through loose shale that slid and clattered beneath the horse's hooves. Silas leaned forward in the saddle, shifting his weight to help his mount find purchase. His thighs burned from gripping. His lower back had started up a dull ache that would not quit. He paid it no mind. Near the top, Mercy stopped once more. She swung down from her mare and walked ahead on foot, her eyes fixed on the ground. Silas followed, leading both horses by their reins. The tracks were clearer here, 2 sets of footprints pressed into the softer earth beneath the pines. One set small, the other larger. They walked side by side. The spacing between prints was even and unhurried, the stride of folks out for a Sunday stroll rather than running for their lives. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle. Mercy crouched beside the larger prints. She traced the outline with one finger, measuring the length, the width, the way the heel pressed into the dirt. She wrote on her slate woman's boots. Low heel. Worn down on the left side, she has walked many miles in these. The way she puts her weight shows she carries something heavy. A pack, most likely. Silas studied the prints. Now that she had pointed it out, he could see what she meant the way the heel sank deeper on one side. The slight hitch in the stride. Same woman as before. Yes, she met Ruth at the berry thickets. They have been walking together ever since. He stood over the smaller footprints, Ruth's footprints, and tried to picture the girl who had made them. 8 years old. Wandering through wild country. But not stumbling. Not running. Walking calm and steady, beside someone she trusted well enough to follow into the unknown. Who was this woman? They kept on along the ridge. The pines thinned out, giving way to bare rock and scrub brush. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dust and wild sage and something else underneath wood smoke, faint but clear. Mercy raised her hand. Silas stopped. He followed her gaze to a shallow dip in the hillside, half hidden behind a tumble of boulders. Through the gaps in the rock, he could make out the corner of a building, weathered boards gone gray with age, a section of roof that had caved in. The dark rectangle of a doorway. A cabin. Abandoned and forgotten. Mercy tied her horse to a stunted juniper and approached on foot. Silas did the same, his hand drifting by habit to the revolver at his hip. He did not draw it, had not drawn it in 3 years, but his fingers rested on the grip. Ready. The cabin had been built by prospectors, judging from the rusted mining tools scattered near the entrance. A broken pickaxe with a rotted handle. A dented pan with a hole rusted clean through the bottom. A coil of rope gone gray and stiff with age. The walls were rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud that had crumbled away in places, leaving gaps wide enough to see through. The door hung crooked on one leather hinge. Mercy stepped inside. Silas followed close behind. The air in there smelled of old wood and mice and something damp rot. Maybe. Creeping up from the floor. A stone fireplace filled most of one wall, its hearth cold and dark and choked with ash. A wooden bunk frame stood against the opposite wall. The rope mattress long since rotted away to nothing. Dust covered everything: the floor, the single shelf above the fireplace, the remains of a table that had collapsed into a heap of boards in the corner. But someone had disturbed that dust. Footprints crossed the floor, the same 2 sets from outside, the woman and the child. They led from the door to the fireplace, circled the room, and stopped near the bunk. Mercy knelt beside the old bed frame. She reached underneath and pulled out something small, holding it up to catch the gray light that filtered through the doorway. A doll. Handmade, by the look of it. The body was stitched from scraps of calico, stuffed with something soft cotton batting or wool from the feel of it. The face was simple, 2 brown buttons sewn on for eyes. A few stitches of red thread making a little smile. The hair was yellow yarn, braided into 2 short pigtails that stuck out on either side. Silas took the doll from her hands. It weighed almost nothing. The fabric was worn soft from years of handling, the yarn hair tangled from countless games of make-believe. One of the button eyes had come loose and hung by a single thread. A child's treasure. Left behind. Why would Ruth leave this? Mercy had already moved on, her attention caught by something near the fireplace. She crouched beside the hearth and picked up a flat stone, the kind folks use to cover a pot or mark a place. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Silas. The paper was rough brown wrapping stock, the kind Mr. Henderson sold at the general store back in Thornfield for 2 cents a sheet. The folds were uneven, creased by small hands that had not quite gotten the knack of it. He opened the paper carefully, smoothing the wrinkles against his thigh. The writing inside was a child's writing. Big letters, crooked lines, some of the words spelled wrong. The pencil had pressed down so hard it tore through the paper in spots. He read, "To whoever finds this, My name is Ruth Webb. I am 8 years old. I am not lost. I ran away on purpose. Papa says I have to marry Mr. Granger when I am 12. Mr. Granger is old. He smells like tobacco spit, and he looks at me the way dogs look at supper. Papa owes him money, and this is how he means to pay it back. I told Papa I do not want to. He hit me. He said I have no say in the matter. Please do not bring me back. I would rather die out here than marry Mr. Granger. Clara is helping me. She is my friend. I met her at the market last spring, and she said if I ever needed help, I should come find her. She knows a safe place where Papa cannot reach. If you are reading this and you are Papa or one of his men, I hate you. I will never come back. Never, ever. Ruth Silas read the letter a second time, a third. The words blurred and sharpened. Blurred again. He thought about Harlan Webb standing in the saloon. The trembling hands. The photograph in the pocket watch. The raw and desperate need in his voice when he begged for help finding his daughter. Please, bring her home. Home. What kind of home sells a child to settle a debt? He handed the letter across to Mercy. She read it slow, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the uneven script and the misspelled words. When she finished, her face stayed still as stone, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped the paper. She wrote on her slate, "Did you know?" Silas shook his head. His throat had closed up too tight for words, even if she could have heard them. Webb paid you to bring her back. Back to this. He stared at what she had written. The accusation in those words, he could not argue against it. He had taken the man's money, had agreed to find the girl without asking a single question about why she might have run, had assumed she was lost, helpless, in danger from the wild country. She was in danger, all right, but not from wolves or weather. Mercy wiped the slate and wrote again. What do we do now? Silas looked at the doll in his hands. The loose button eye stared up at him, blank and trusting. He thought about the letter, the careful, desperate words of a child who had chosen the unknown wilderness over the certainty of her father's house. He tucked the doll into his saddlebag, folded the letter and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Next to the blue ribbon, "We find her." He wrote back, "And we do not take her back." Mercy read the words. Something moved across her face. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Then it passed, replaced by that careful steadiness she wore like armor. She nodded once and turned toward the door. Outside, the afternoon light had gone slant, the shadows stretching long and thin across the hillside. The wind had died away to nothing, leaving the air still and heavy and hard to breathe. Silas untied his horse and swung up into the saddle, his mind turning over everything they had found. Ruth had planned this, had found herself an ally, this Clara, whoever she was, had walked out of her father's house and into the wilderness with nothing but a doll and a desperate hope and directions to a woman who had promised to help. And now someone else was tracking her. 2 riders on fast horses who had taken the wrong turn at the canyon fork. Who were they? Webb's hired hands. Someone else. Mercy mounted her mare and pointed toward the east, toward a distant ridge that caught the last of the sunlight and held it there like a promise. The tracks led that way, Ruth and Clara, walking together toward whatever safe place Clara had found. They had to reach the girl first. Silas kicked his horse forward, and they rode toward the fading light. Behind them, in the abandoned cabin, the dust settled slow and quiet over the place where Ruth Webb had said goodbye to her childhood. And somewhere down in the canyons below, 2 riders had figured out they had taken the wrong path and were doubling back. The sky turned the color of old rust. Silas saw it building from the east, a wall of dust climbing up from the canyon floor, rising higher and higher until it swallowed the horizon whole. The wind shifted direction, and suddenly the air was full of grit, stinging his eyes, filling his mouth, coating his tongue with the taste of dry earth and things long dead. Mercy was already moving. She grabbed hold of his arm and pointed toward a dark gap in the cliff face, a cave, barely visible through the swirling brown. He kicked his horse forward, but the animal threw its head back and fought the reins. Sand peppered its flanks like buckshot. He swung down and pulled the horse by the bridle. Shouting words the wind snatched away before they reached his own ears. Mercy had her mare's reins wrapped tight around her fist, dragging the terrified creature toward the shelter. The dust was everywhere now, in his nose, in his ears, grinding between his teeth like fine sand. They reached the cave mouth just as the full weight of the storm came down on them. The wind did not howl or moan. It screamed a high, keening sound that seemed to come from every direction at once, filling his skull until he could not tell where the noise ended and his own thoughts began. Silas pressed his back against the cave wall and covered his face with his arm. His horse crowded in beside him, trembling from nose to tail, its eyes rolling white with fear. Mercy tied both animals to a rock outcropping near the entrance and moved deeper into the darkness. The space was small, 10 feet deep at most. The ceiling so low Silas had to duck his head, but the wind could not reach them here. The screaming faded to a dull roar. He sank down against the cold stone. His lungs burned from the grit he had swallowed. His eyes watered, tears cutting pale tracks through the dust caked on his cheeks. He spat, and what came out was the color of river mud. Mercy sat across from him, her legs folded beneath her. Dust coated her hair, her clothes, the creases of her face. In the dim light, she looked like something carved from the canyon itself. The storm raged on outside. Through the cave mouth, Silas could see nothing but swirling brown, thick as smoke from a burning barn. The tracks they had been following, Ruth's tracks. Clara's tracks would be gone now. Buried. Wiped clean. 3 days of work. Gone in less than an hour. He closed his eyes and pressed the heels of his hands against them until he saw sparks. The storm lasted until after dark. By the time the wind began to fade, what little light had been left outside was long gone. Mercy struck a match and lit their small oil lamp. The wick had burned down to barely an inch, and set it on a flat stone between them. The flame wavered and danced, throwing strange shadows against the cave walls. Silas's canteen was nearly empty. He took a small sip and felt the grit scrape down his throat like swallowing sand. He handed the canteen to Mercy. She drank and passed it back without meeting his eyes. They sat in silence. The horses had settled some, standing hip-shot near the entrance, their heads hanging low. Outside, the wind had dropped to a whisper, but dust still hung in the air, turning the darkness hazy. Silas reached for his slate. His fingers were stiff from gripping the reins so hard for so long. The tracks are gone. Mercy read the words. She did not answer. We will have to start over. Go back to the cabin. Try to find the trail again. Nothing. She stared at the slate like it held words she did not want to read. Mercy. She wiped the surface clean and wrote 2 words, I know. That was all. He waited for more, but she set down the chalk and looked toward the cave entrance, watching the dust settle in the dying wind. The quiet stretched out between them. The lamp flame guttered, nearly died, then steadied again. Silas thought about the letter tucked in his shirt pocket. Ruth's letter. The words she had scratched out in her careful, crooked hand. I would rather die out here than marry Mr. Granger. 8 years old. Writing those words, meaning every one of them, and he had very nearly brought her back. The thought hit him like a mule kick to the gut. He had taken Webb's money without a second thought, had ridden out to find the girl without once stopping to wonder why she might have run in the first place, had been so wrapped up in his own empty drifting, his own sorry self-pity, that he had not troubled himself to see the truth standing right in front of his face. Webb's trembling hands, the hollow look in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. Silas had reckoned it was love, a father's grief for his lost child. But it was not love. It was ownership. The panic of a man watching his property slip away. He looked down at his own hands, dust-covered, calloused, empty. What manner of man was he? What manner of man took money to drag a child back to something like that? The shame rose up in his chest, hot and thick, until he could hardly draw breath. He had spent 3 years telling himself he was nothing, that he had nothing left to offer, nothing left to lose, that the emptiness inside him was some kind of purity, a burning away of everything false. But that was a lie, a comfortable lie that let him drift without purpose, without connection, without the risk of caring about anything or anyone ever again. He had failed. He was failing still. He was nothing but a hollow man doing hollow work for hollow reasons. And the only thing that had kept him from finishing this particular job was a deaf woman who could read the truth in the way a man stood. Silas lurched to his feet. The cave ceiling scraped the top of his head. He ducked past the horses and stumbled outside, into the settling dust. The ground was soft under his boots, inches of fine grit deposited by the storm, still shifting in the faint breeze. He walked without direction, his boots sinking with each step. The night was dark and shapeless. He could not see more than 20 feet in any direction. His foot caught on something buried in the dust. He went down hard. His hands slammed into the ground. His knees drove into soft earth. The impact jarred his teeth together, and he tasted blood where he had bitten his tongue. He tried to push himself up. His hands sank deeper. The dust had mixed with water from somewhere a seep in the rock. Groundwater rising up from below and turned to mud beneath the dry surface layer. His palms disappeared up to the wrists. His knees sank deeper still. Silas thrashed, trying to pull free. The mud sucked at him, cold and grasping. He yanked his right hand loose with a wet squelch and immediately drove his left arm deeper. The more he fought, the further down he went. He forced himself to stop moving, made himself go still. The mud came up to his elbows now. His chest pressed against the slick surface. The cold seeped through his shirt, chilling his skin, raising goose flesh along his arms. The smell was thick and foul, rotting vegetation, stagnant water, the deep earth stink of things long buried and best left forgotten. He was stuck, trapped in the muck like a hog in a wallow, like a fool who did not have the sense to watch where he was walking. A sound tore out of his throat, harsh, broken, nothing like laughter. He pressed his forehead down into the mud and let it come. The sound was ugly. The sound of a man who had finally seen himself clear and found nothing worth the looking. Here he was. Silas Drifter, war hero, scout, the man who was supposed to save a little girl, face down in the muck, covered in filth, unable to save himself, let alone anyone else. A hand closed around his collar. Mercy. She had followed him out of the cave and found him wallowing in the mire like something less than human. She pulled, her grip strong and sure, and he felt his body shift. She braced her feet against a rock and hauled again. His right arm came free with a sucking sound, then his left. She dragged him backward, out of the mud pit, onto solid ground. He lay on his back, gasping, covered in black muck from his chest to his fingertips. The mud was in his hair, in his ears, caked in the corners of his mouth. He stank of it. Mercy stood over him. The lamplight from the cave mouth caught her face calm, unsurprised, showing not a trace of judgment. She held out her slate. Are you finished? He stared at the words. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half something else that he did not have a name for. She waited. He took the slate. His muddy fingers left streaks across the dark surface as he wrote, I do not know what I am doing anymore. I do not know why I am here. I do not know what comes after we find the girl. Mercy read what he had written, wiped the slate, wrote back, then find one more track, and then another. That is all any of us can do. Silas lay in the dirt, covered in mud. Whatever remained of his self-respect buried somewhere beneath the surface of that pit he had tumbled into. He read her words again, and again. One more track, then another. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all there ever was. He let her pull him to his feet. The night passed slow and cold. Silas scraped the mud from his clothes as best he could with a flat stone and the last of his water. Mercy slept near the cave entrance with one hand resting on her knife. He did not sleep at all. When the first gray light of dawn crept into the canyon, they stepped outside together. The storm had remade the world. Fresh dust filled the gullies, erased the paths, turned familiar shapes into something strange and new. The tracks they had followed were buried, gone without a trace, but the ground was damp with morning dew, and damp ground held prints. Mercy walked to the edge of the mud pit, the same one Silas had stumbled into, and crouched low. Her fingers traced something pressed into the soft earth. She went rigid. Silas crossed to her side and looked down. Hoof prints. 2 horses. Fresh made within the last few hours. The riders had passed right by their cave in the darkness, close enough to touch. Mercy pulled out her slate. They did not stop. They know exactly where they are going. Silas felt the cold settle deep into his bones. How close are they? She studied the prints, measured their depth with her finger, tested the dampness of the soil. Half a day ahead, maybe less. She looked up at him, and in her gray eyes he saw the same terrible arithmetic he was running in his own head. Half a day. They had half a day to reach Ruth before someone else did. The farmstead appeared through the morning haze like something remembered from a dream. A small house with whitewashed walls gone gray from years of weather. A barn listing to one side. A wooden fence that had given up trying to stand straight a long time ago. Smoke curled up from the chimney, thin and white against the pale sky. Chickens scratched and pecked in the dirt yard, their heads bobbing as they hunted for seed. Silas reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the tree line. Mercy pulled up beside him, her mare blowing hard from the long ride. They had pushed the animals past what was fair, following those fresh tracks through country that seemed determined to throw them off the scent. And now both horses stood with heaving flanks and foam dripping from their bits. The tracks led straight to the farmstead. 2 sets of hoof prints, cutting across Ruth's trail and ending at the fence rail where 2 lathered horses stood tied. Silas did not recognize the brands. The front door of the house was closed tight. He swung down from his saddle and handed his reins to Mercy. She caught hold of his arm before he could take a step, her grip firm enough to leave marks. Her eyes asked the question she could not put voice to. He shook his head. He did not know what waited for him in that little house, did not know what he would find when he walked through that door. But he meant to find out. Mercy released him. She pulled both horses back into the tree line, out of sight from the house. Her hand moved to the knife at her belt. Silas crossed the open ground. The chickens scattered as he came near, clucking their disapproval at being disturbed. The smell of fresh bread reached him first warm and yeasty, the kind of smell that made a man think of home even when he did not have one anymore. Beneath it came something else, coffee boiling on a stove, wood smoke from the chimney, and the sharp tang of fear sweat that no amount of baking could cover up. He stopped 10 feet from the door. "I know you are in there." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "I am coming inside. I am not carrying a weapon." That was not the whole truth. The revolver was back in his saddlebag with Mercy, but the knife in his boot was still there, pressing cold against his calf with every step. No answer from inside. Nothing but silence. He walked to the door and pushed it open. The room was small, a kitchen and sitting area combined, with a stone hearth against the far wall and a rough-hewn table in the center. 4 chairs sat around the table, one of them smaller than the others, sized for a child. 2 men stood near the fireplace with their backs to the flames. One was tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet blade and eyes that had seen too much to care about seeing more. The other was shorter and broader through the chest, a scar running from his temple to his jaw, like someone had tried to split his head open and given up partway through. Between the men and the door stood a woman. She was past 50, her hair gone to iron gray and pulled back in a tight knot at the base of her skull. Her dress had been patched in a dozen places with fabric that did not quite match, the seams neat and careful despite the wear. In her hands she held a shotgun old, the stock wrapped in cracked leather, the barrel scratched and dull but clean as the day it was made. The gun pointed at the floor, but her finger rested easy on the trigger. Behind her, pressed into the corner near the hearth, was a child, Ruth. She was smaller than Silas had pictured in his mind. Thin arms, thin legs. A dress that might have been white once, but was now the color of trail dust. Her hair had come loose from its braids and hung in tangles around a face gone pale with fear. Her eyes dark, wide, fixed on Silas, did not blink. Another one. The tall man's voice was flat as a planed board. Webb is throwing money around something fierce. Silas stepped into the room. The door swung shut behind him with a soft click. You two are the trackers he hired. It was not a question. He could see the answer in their trail-worn clothes, in the way they stood with their weight balanced and their hands loose near their belts. Men who did this kind of work for a living. And you are the fool who took the scenic route. The shorter man grinned, and the scar pulled his mouth into something crooked and mean. We have been here since before sunup. The old woman has been uncooperative. The woman with the shotgun. Clara, it had to be Clara, kept her eyes fixed on the two men. I told them I do not know any Ruth Webb. They do not seem inclined to believe me. We saw the tracks, old woman. The tall one took a step forward, and Silas saw Clara's finger tighten on the trigger. Two sets leading right to your door, one big, one small. Plenty of folks pass through this way. Does not mean they stop. These tracks do not leave. Silas looked at Ruth. She had pressed herself as far back into the corner as the walls would allow, her hands flat against the rough boards behind her. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow hitches, the breathing of a child trying to make herself small enough to disappear. He thought about the letter in his pocket. I would rather die out here than marry Mr. Granger. He thought about the money in his saddlebag. Webb's money. Payment for a job he had shaken hands on. He thought about the boy in the field hospital, 19 years old, dying with his mother's name on his lips while Silas held his hand and could do nothing but watch. The tall man was studying him with those flat, empty eyes. So what is your play? Friend, you here to help us collect, or are you here to make trouble? Silas did not answer right away. He looked around the room at Clara with her shotgun and her patched dress, at the two hired men with their easy menace, at Ruth, cowering in the corner like a rabbit caught in a snare. The smell of bread filled his nose. Somewhere outside, a rooster crowed. He had spent 3 years running away from choices, from responsibility, from the weight of other people's lives pressing down on his shoulders. He was tired of running. The girl stays here. His voice came out calm and level. I am not taking her back. The tall man's expression did not flicker. Webb paid us good money to bring her home. Paid you too. I reckon. You want to walk away from your cut. That is your affair. But we are taking her. No, you are not. Mister, you do not have a gun. We do. The shorter man's hand drifted down to rest on the grip of his revolver. Let us not make this harder than it needs to be. Silas felt the weight of the knife in his boot. He could reach it in 2 heartbeats, maybe less. But 2 heartbeats was a long stretch of time when the other fellow already had his hand on his weapon. Do you know what Webb wants her for? He kept his voice easy, conversational, like they were discussing the weather or the price of cattle. He owes money to a man named Granger, owes a great deal of it. Granger is 58 years old. He means to marry Ruth here when she turns 12. That is the arrangement. That is what you are fixing to send her back to. The shorter man's grin wavered. His hand stayed on his gun, but his eyes cut sideways toward his partner. The tall man shrugged one bony shoulder. Not my concern what happens after. A job is a job. Is it? Silas took a step forward, not toward the men, toward Ruth, toward the corner where she huddled like something half wild. You got daughters, sisters, nieces. He did not look at the trackers. He looked at the girl. You ever stop to wonder what you would do if someone tried to sell one of them off? I said, it is not my. I heard what you said. Silas stopped in the middle of the room, putting himself between the men with guns and the child without one. I am asking what you believe. The silence stretched out long and thin. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, that rooster crowed again. The shorter man spoke first. Emmett, maybe we ought to. Shut your mouth, Carl. I am just saying, if what he is telling is the truth. Since when do you give a hang about truth? The tall man, Emmett, turned on his partner. We took the money. We do the work. That is how it has always been. I know how it works. But I am just... Carl's hand dropped away from his gun. He rubbed at the back of his neck, his eyes moving to Ruth in her corner. She is only a little girl. Emmett, look at her. Ruth had not moved, had not spoken a word. She stood with her back pressed to the wall and her dark eyes watching these men who had come to drag her back to a life she had risked everything to escape. Emmett's jaw went tight. We do not get paid for having opinions. Then do not take the pay. Those words came from Clara. She had not moved an inch, the shotgun still steady in her worn hands, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen worse than 2 hired guns and lived to tell of it. You can turn around and walk out that door right now. Tell Webb you never found her. Tell him the storm washed out the trail. Tell him whatever story suits you. But you do not have to do this thing. Emmett stared at her. His hand twitched toward his belt. You think I am afraid of you? Clara raised the shotgun, and now the barrel pointed square at his chest. I was born into chains, mister. I walked 200 miles through swamp and forest with nothing but the clothes on my back to get free. You reckon I'm going to stand by and let 2 hired boys take this child out of my house? The room held its breath. Silas watched Emmett's face, watched the calculation working behind those flat eyes. The tall man was thinking about odds, 2 pistols against 1 scattergun, against an unarmed drifter, against an old woman and a scared little girl. But he was thinking about something else, too. Silas could see it in the way his jaw kept working, the way his gaze kept sliding toward Ruth in her corner. Emmett. Carl's voice had gone quiet. Let us just go. We took the man's money. Then we give it back. Carl stepped away from the fireplace, stepped toward the door. I am not dragging a child back to that. I am not doing it. Emmett did not move. His hand hovered near his belt, trembling just enough to see. Silas spoke again, soft and steady. You can still be somebody different, right here, right now. You can walk out that door and be the man who did not do this. The words hung in the dusty air. Emmett's face twisted anger and shame and something else fighting for purchase. Then his hand fell to his side. Webb can go straight to perdition. He spat the words like they tasted bad. Both of you, not a word about this to anyone. We were never here. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides. Carl followed, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The door opened. The door closed. Footsteps crossed the yard. Horses' hooves struck packed earth, then faded into the morning. They were gone. Clara lowered the shotgun. Her hands were shaking now she had hidden it well, but the tremor showed plain as she propped the gun against the wall. Silas turned to look at Ruth. The girl had not moved from her corner. Her eyes were still wide, her body still pressed flat against the wall. But something in her face had shifted. The terror was bleeding away, and in its place came something fragile and uncertain. The door opened behind him. Mercy stepped into the room. She must have seen the men ride off and reckoned it was safe to come inside. Her gray eyes moved across the scene, Silas standing in the middle of the room. Clara by the hearth. The small figure huddled in the corner. She crossed the floor without hesitation and knelt down in front of Ruth. She did not reach for the girl, did not make any sudden moves. She simply knelt there, bringing herself down to Ruth's level, and waited with the patience of someone who understood what it meant to be afraid. Ruth's gaze traveled over Mercy's face, over the slate hanging from its cord around her neck, over the stillness of her hands and the quiet in her gray eyes. Slowly, carefully, Ruth reached out one small hand. Her fingers touched the edge of the slate, traced along it. She looked up at Mercy with a question written plain on her face. Mercy nodded. Ruth picked up the chalk. In shaky letters, she wrote a single word. Safe. Mercy took the slate back, wiped it clean with her sleeve, wrote her answer and held it up. Safe. Ruth read the word. Read it again. Then she stepped away from the wall, crossed the small distance between them, and wrapped her thin arms around Mercy's neck. Mercy's eyes closed. Her arms came up slow and gentle and folded around the child. Clara let out a long breath and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She turned to Silas, and when she spoke, her voice had gone rough. You are not like the others he sent. Silas looked at the money still sitting in his saddlebag outside, at the letter still pressed against his chest, at the woman and the girl holding each other in the corner of a farmhouse at the edge of nowhere. I am trying not to be. Clara nodded. She moved toward the hearth and the kettle hanging there. That bread is getting cold. Sit down and eat. Both of you look like you have not had a proper meal in days. Silas pulled out a chair and sat. But even as Clara cut thick slices of bread and poured cups of strong black coffee, even as Ruth slowly loosened her grip on Mercy and took her place at the table, he could not shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Emmett and Carl had left without a fight. They knew where Ruth was hiding now, and they knew that Webb would pay double for that information. The ride back to Thornfield took the better part of 2 days. They moved at an easy pace, letting the horses rest when they needed it, stopping to water them at the creeks that fed down from the canyon lands. Silas did not push for speed. There was no cause for hurry now. Ruth was safe at Clara's farmstead, tucked away from the world, starting fresh in a place where her father's reach could not find her. The envelope of money sat heavy in his saddlebag. He had not opened it since Webb first pressed it into his hands. Mercy rode beside him through the long stretches of sage and scrub, comfortable in the silence that was her constant companion. The slate hung around her neck, but she did not reach for it. There was nothing that needed saying. The wind carried the smell of juniper and wild grass, and somewhere high above them, a red-tailed hawk circled on the warm currents of air. Patient as a prayer, they reached the outskirts of Thornfield as the sun began its slow slide toward the western ridge. The town looked the same as it had when Silas rode out the same dusty main street, the same false-fronted buildings with their peeling paint, the same horses tied to the same rails. The Red Stallion's piano was playing again, something fast and clumsy that spilled out through the swinging doors and died in the evening air. Silas swung down from his horse in front of the saloon. He handed his reins to Mercy. She caught his eye. A question. He shook his head. This was something he needed to do alone. The doors swung inward under his hand. The familiar smell wrapped around him, stale beer soaked into old wood, cheap tobacco smoke hanging in layers, the grease from the kitchen out back. The piano player glanced up, missed a note, and kept on going. A few faces turned his direction, then turned away again. Harlan Webb sat at a table near the window, right where Silas had first laid eyes on him. The man looked worse than before. His eyes had sunk deeper into his skull, rimmed with red from lack of sleep or too much whiskey or both. His clothes hung loose on a frame that seemed to have shrunk in the days since Silas last saw him. An empty bottle stood at his elbow, and his fingers wrapped around a glass that trembled when he lifted it to his lips. Silas crossed the room and stopped at the edge of the table. Webb looked up. His face cycled through several expressions: hope, confusion, fear, before settling on something like desperate hunger. "You found her." His voice cracked like dry kindling. "You found my Ruth." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out the leather envelope. He set it on the table between them, next to the empty bottle. "I found her." Webb's hands moved toward the envelope, then stopped. His eyes shifted from the money to Silas's face. The hunger began to curdle into something else. "Where is she?" "Somewhere safe." "Where?" "I am not going to tell you that, Mr. Webb." The words landed heavy as stones dropped in a well. Webb's face went white as flour, then red as brick. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. "She left a letter." Silas pulled the folded paper from his shirt pocket. Ruth's letter. The one she had written in that abandoned cabin. He laid it on the table beside the money. "You ought to read it." Webb stared at the paper like it might rear up and bite him. His hands shook as he unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, and Silas watched the color drain from his cheeks with every line. When he finished, Webb set the letter down. His hands trembled so bad now the glass beside him rattled against the wood. "She does not understand." His voice came out barely louder than a whisper. "She is just a child. She does not know what she is. She knows plenty. Granger is not, he would not." Webb's words stumbled over each other like a man running downhill too fast to stop. "It is not like she thinks. He is a respectable man. He would provide for her, give her a good life. She is 8 years old. She would be 12 before anything. She is 8 years old. Mr. Webb." The name hung in the air between them. Silas had not meant to put such weight on it, but there it was: judgment, condemnation, a line drawn in the sawdust of a saloon floor. Webb's face crumpled in on itself like a barn collapsing. For a moment, he looked like what he truly was: a broken man who had made terrible choices and was only now beginning to see them plain. His hands came up to cover his face. His shoulders shook. Silas did not feel pity. He felt nothing much at all, just a hollow space where anger might have been if he had the energy left for it. "The money is all there." He nodded toward the envelope. "I did not earn it." He turned and walked toward the door. "Wait." Webb's voice stopped him halfway. "Please, just tell me, is she happy? Is she safe?" Silas looked back over his shoulder. The man at the table sat hunched and small, his eyes wet, his hands still trembling. A father who had tried to sell his own daughter to settle his debts. A man who had lost everything worth keeping and deserved to lose it. "She is safe." Silas pushed through the swinging doors into the evening air. "That is all you get to know." A week passed. Silas spent the first 3 days in the boarding house at the edge of town, lying on a narrow bed and staring at water stains on the ceiling. He slept when sleep would come, ate when he remembered to eat. The room was small and plain: a bed, a chair, a washstand with a cracked mirror that showed him a face he barely recognized anymore. On the 4th day, he walked to the general store and bought a new shirt. His old one still carried the stains from that mud pit, brown marks that would not scrub out no matter how hard he tried. On the 5th day, he sat on the boarding house porch as the sun went down. The sky turned orange, then rose, then purple. He watched the colors change and thought about the roads that led out of this town, south toward Texas and the cattle drives, north toward the mountains and the mining camps, east toward places he had never seen and likely never would. He thought about the road that led west, toward a crooked little cottage on a hillside where a woman lived alone with her herbs and her silence. On the 6th day, He packed his bag. It did not take long. Everything he owned fit into a single saddlebag, a change of clothes, a razor, the knife from his boot, a handful of coins saved from odd jobs over the years. He had carried his whole life in that bag for 3 years running. He looked at it for a long spell. Then he tucked one more thing inside the blue ribbon he had found in the brambles. Ruth's ribbon. He could not rightly say why he kept it. He just did. On the 7th day, he rode west. The cottage appeared through the morning mist exactly as he remembered it, tilted against the hillside like it was tired of standing up straight. Smoke rising thin from the gap in the roof. Bundles of dried herbs swaying on their rope line. The creek murmured past the fence, talking to itself the way creeks do. A crow called out from the pines. Mercy was in the yard, splitting wood. She did not turn when he swung down from his horse. Of course she did not. She could not hear him coming. Her back stayed straight, her arms rising and falling in that steady rhythm he had come to know. The axe bit into the wood with clean, sure strokes. Crack, crack, crack. Silas tied his horse to the fence post and walked into the yard. She finished splitting the log in front of her before she turned around. Her face showed no surprise. She looked at him like she had been expecting him all along, like she had known he would find his way back here sooner or later. Maybe she had known. Maybe she could read that in a man the same way she read tracks in the dirt. He stopped a few feet away from her. The morning light caught the gray in her eyes and turned it silver. Sawdust clung to her sleeves. A strand of dark hair had worked loose from her braid and fallen across her cheek. He reached for the slate around his neck, Martha's old slate, borrowed and never returned. His fingers found the worn stub of chalk. He wrote slowly, carefully, each letter set down with purpose. I need a place to stay. You need someone to split wood. Mercy read the words. Her expression did not change. She took the slate from his hands, wiped it clean, wrote, You cannot sleep in the cottage. The roof leaks. Something tightened in his chest. He had misread her, had assumed too much. But she was still writing. The barn has a dry corner. You can bed down there until you fix the roof. He read the words once, twice, 3 times. She was not sending him away. She was giving him work to do. He took the slate back. I do not know how to fix a roof. Then I will teach you. She held out the axe. The handle was warm from her grip, the wood worn smooth from years of use. He took it, feeling the weight settle into his palm like it belonged there. Mercy walked past him toward the cottage. At the door she paused and looked back over her shoulder. The morning sun caught her face, her hair, the small smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth before it disappeared again. Then she went inside, leaving the door standing open behind her. Silas stood in the yard with the axe in his hands and the creek murmuring past the fence. The crow called again from its perch in the pines. A breeze carried the smell of wood smoke and drying herbs and something else underneath bread, baking in the oven, warm and golden. He set his saddlebag beside the chopping block, picked up a length of juniper, positioned it on the stump. The axe rose and fell. Crack. The wood split clean down the middle. He reached for another piece. A month on, the roof no longer leaked. Silas sat on the porch he had rebuilt with his own 2 hands, plank by plank, nail by nail. From wood he had cut and planed himself. The evening air had turned cool, carrying the first whispers of autumn on its breath. The trees along the creek had started to change color, their leaves edged with gold and russet. Mercy sat in the chair beside him, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She did not look his direction. Her gaze rested on the hills to the west, watching the way the fading light painted them in shades of amber and rose. The slate lay on the bench between them, but neither one reached for it. They had found other ways to talk in the weeks since he had come to stay. A touch on the arm meant "I am here." A raised palm meant "wait a moment." A nod toward the door meant "come inside." Supper is ready. 100 small signals, built up over long days of working side by side, filling the quiet with meaning words could not match. Silas lifted his cup and took a sip. The coffee was strong and black, the way she made it. He had grown fond of it that way. From inside the cottage came the smell of stew bubbling on the stove, venison and potatoes and wild onions, seasoned with herbs from the bundles drying near the window. His stomach rumbled soft in anticipation. He reached for the slate, wrote 2 words, "Thank you." Mercy read them. She did not ask what for. She knew. She wiped the surface clean and wrote back, "You are welcome." The sun touched the top of the ridge and began to slip behind it. The first stars showed themselves, faint pinpricks in the darkening sky. Somewhere out in the brush, a coyote lifted its voice in a long, lonesome call that echoed off the hills and faded into silence. Silas listened until the last note died away. Then he picked up the slate one final time. "I reckon I will stay on, if that suits you." Mercy read what he had written. She looked at him, really looked, her gray eyes searching his face for something hidden beneath the surface. Whatever she found there made the corners of her mouth curve up, just slightly, into something that was almost a smile. She took the chalk from his hand, wrote her answer. "It suits me fine." She set the slate aside and turned back toward the sunset. Her shoulder pressed warm against his. Silas did not pull away. The stars came out thick and bright, filling up the sky the way they only can out in country far from any town. The coyote did not sing again. The world settled into stillness, and the creek kept up its quiet conversation with the stones, and the smell of supper drifted out through the open door. For the first time in more years than he cared to count, Silas Drifter knew exactly where he was supposed to be. I did not set out to write a story about redemption. I reckoned I would tell a simple tale about 2 folks who had lost their way and somehow found each other in the wide open spaces of the West. But stories have a way of teaching the one who tells them. Silas taught me that running from your sorrows only makes the road longer and lonelier. Mercy taught me that silence is not emptiness. It is a place where understanding can take root and grow. And Ruth, brave, stubborn Ruth, taught me that even the youngest among us know when love has turned into a cage. If you have ever felt lost and wondering what comes next, I hope this story reminded you that you only need to take one step, not the whole journey. Just one step, then another after that. If you have ever been overlooked or set aside, I hope Mercy showed you that your way of seeing this world is not lesser, it is different, and it is needed. If you have ever made choices that keep you awake at night, I hope Silas proved it is never too late to turn yourself around. Thank you kindly for walking this road with me. This work was inspired by classic Western tales of the American frontier and was created solely for entertainment purposes. The story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters, names, and events portrayed in this narrative are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or to actual events is entirely coincidental and unintentional.